So today I'm going to argue against Michael that West German terrorism was a product of immoral communism and not a product of a good cause or a cause that was well fought. So just a little overview: the Red Faction Army, which we'll now call the RAF, murdered 34 people and would have killed more had the police and intelligence agencies not arrested and prevented them from carrying out these additional actions, which is from the article that I read, her page 8. And the author also argues that this kind of domestic terrorism that was prevalent in West Germany influenced radical Islamic terrorism, domestic terrorism namely, and that it needs to be denounced and the legacy needs to not live on of it being a positive, well-thought cause. And then here's a picture of a policeman rescuing a victim of the RAF's brutality. So here I've outlined the beliefs of the RAF. So they wanted to destroy both capitalism and liberal democracy in the Federal Republic of West Germany in the hopes of giving support to an expected global communist revolution. And that the communist interpretations of the causes of the Axis dictatorships was that they were the product of capitalism. Hence, as capitalism was reproduced in all three societies, and as many persons who served the governments of Imperial Japan, Fascist Italy, and Nazi Germany returned to positions of influence in the post-war democracies, the terror groups could draw on a long communist tradition sustained as well by the existing communist regimes. And then lastly, the stage of murder was also a product of the intersection of anti-Semitism with left-wing radicalism, which I think is the most important of these 3 points. That we're going to look at a little bit of a case study within the actions of the RAF on. I'll go to it. I'll discuss it later, but we're going to talk about the anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitic actions by the RAF. So the RAF's justification and argument, which is kind of more leaning towards Michael's point, little backstory on this, was the RAF was a byproduct of the New Left and its disintegration. And her on page 17 says the RAF and the New Left extremist members attacked Western democracy as a sham, on capitalism as an unjust and irrational system, and on anti-communism as a tool to maintain imperialism by depicting a non-existent threat, all placed on Western democracy on the intellectual defense. So I think this really sums up well the point, or the justification and argument of the RAF that Western democracy was a sham, that anti-communism was a tool to maintain imperialism and colonialism, and I think it's really important that we know this going forward in my presentation. So now, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the attack on the Jewish Community Center in Berlin. So this is actually a quote from the RAF in West Berlin. And the Jews, they said, the Jews who were expelled by fascism have themselves become fascists, who in collaboration with American capitalism want to eradicate the Palestinian people. So that was kind of their justification and the press statement that they released in justification for their actions, the bombing of the West Jewish Community Center in Berlin. And so I think that it's important to view this as a terrorist act and not a justification for the argument that they were making, that they want to eradicate anti-communism, they want to eradicate capitalism and democracy in general. So here's another quote from her, which he calls defensive anti-Semitism. A focus on the Nazi past and the fate of the Jews was an expression of neurosis, a kind of guilt complex that stood in the way of psychic health and clear thinking. The Israelis were the new Nazis, and the Palestinians anti-fascist heroes. This line of reasoning lifted the burden of the Nazi past from its advocates and opened the way for West German radicals to attack Israelis and Jews with a clear conscience. I think this is also a really important quote, and it explains not so much the justification, or the argument, but the justification of the RAF for their actions. Lastly, so after we looked at that case study, I'll now conclude my points with this quote from her, and make some other points too. But these people did evil things because they came to believe in the absolute righteousness of a set of wrong ideas. Their humanity was inseparable from the ideas of communism and armed revolution. And I think this is really telling of the time. You can see the same thing happening, a similar thing, not the same, but a similar thing happening in Cuba at the time with Castro and his armed militants. And I think that this is really an interesting point that Herf is making, that the humanity, which I'm arguing was lost, was inseparable from the ideas of communism and armed revolution. So they, instead of doing peaceful protests, instead of making their point more humane, they actually hurt their cause and were unable to separate humanity from the ideas of communism and armed revolution. So now I'll kind of address Michael's point a little bit. I did a little bit earlier, but basically I'm arguing that this was an inhumane, inexcusable acts of violence that influenced radical Islamic terrorism, that hurt the efforts of West German democracy. And so I argue that although they were fighting for a cause that they believed in, and the hunger strikes were to some point successful, that their atrocities that were committed outweighed the successfulness of their strike. Thank you. Do you want me to pull up your presentation?
Sure, thanks.
Just chapters 14 and 15.
It should be.
Oh, right. Perfect. And I'll hand this to you.